Google Calendar thing going right now. I've been really bad about like putting when I like meeting. Yeah. So I know I have one at a meeting at 4. Great.
I think a lot of other people can have that.
Hi, Clara. Hi, Nida. Okay, we've got 12:30, so why don't we get started? Good afternoon, S&P. Good afternoon. Welcome to Jazbeth. Yeah. Okay, from Chicago, joining us today. And it might be the case that we have other visitors coming in, which would be delightful. I'm always happy to have visitors in. Through the years, students have commented that I behave differently when there's a visitor in the room. And part of that is because I do try to provide some context. So you're walking into a sensation and perception class. This is an upper-level psychology class, and we've been going for 7 weeks now. This is the beginning of week number 8. So we have a lot of vocabulary that's probably not familiar to you. So frequently, I will say things in a way that I wouldn't normally say to hope to maybe bring you on board, and maybe we can get the students to help us out with that as well. A couple of housekeeping items before we dive into our topics for today. So here's the syllabus, and we're beginning week 8. Just a reminder that, first of all, congratulations to the many people who did well on exam 2. We had an exam in here on Friday, and you got that back later that day, and some people did really, really well. A small number of people struggled quite a bit, but generally speaking, people did very well, so congratulations on all of that. Love to get speedy feedback to you. we have another due date coming up. So Wednesday, when we're back in this class, we'll have the chairs in a U shape, and you'll have your, you don't have to bring it with you, but you will have written your second paper on partial blindness. So we had a conversation previously on blindness. This will be on more mild versions of that condition. And we'll have a student-generated discussion. I'll try not to speak, and we'll try to make that entirely student-driven. And that will help you in part because what you're partly being graded on in this course is your class participation. And all professors across the campus have to have into the registrar on Monday morning, October 19th, your midterm grades. So this is true for all of your classes. So we hope you'll make the most of that and write a nice paper and also participate actively on Wednesday's session. I'm pretty confident that you'll do that because those have gone very well in recent weeks. Okay, so that's where we're going for the next session. And I wanted to make sure that we could set the stage just to sort of reorient you. We'll take on some new material today on face perception and visual imagery. But we do want to help orient Jasbeth so that she can have some understanding about what's going on today. So we were going through different kinds of features of visual perception. So I can see you've got a snazzy yellowish color on, right? And we learned all about how our perception of yellow there might be very different from our perception of yellow up here. Even though they both are psychologically yellow, they actually arise from very different kinds of mechanisms. So we had some conversation about color perception. We also talked about form perception. And on that topic, we were describing something called Fourier Analysis. So why don't I see if I can open up to the students and see if they can tell us a little bit about how Fourier Analysis works. Turns out that our brains do Fourier Analysis. What does that mean? Anybody want to help us? Okay, thanks, Gabby.
Was that the four different kinds of
parameters?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
it's F, A, B, O, and F is frequency, the A is amplitude, the P is phase, and the O is orientation.
Okay. Okay, right. So it turns out that our brain is able to break down any kind of visual image that might be landing on our retina into these different kinds of components called frequency, amplitude, phase, and orientation. And it wasn't obvious that that's how the brain was working, but we now have considerable information that our brains are doing it. Also, as you're hearing my voice, your brain is performing something like a Fourier analysis on the acoustic energy that's coming from my vocal cords and hitting your eardrums. In that case, we don't have an orientation, but we still have something called a phase, amplitude, and frequency. And we can show you some pictures of that. In fact, just to give you an idea, and this will be review for other folks in the classroom. Actually, maybe I'll work my way back to that. I was going to show you a picture of some different gratings that exemplify different kinds of orientations or phases, but I also wanted to get to another component of that, which is called the contrast sensitivity function. So I'm going to try to take away the answer. Maybe you've already seen it, but I wonder if somebody can tell us how we use the contrast sensitivity function and anything you know about the contrast sensitivity function or remember from last week. So certainly related to Fourier analysis, this idea of FAPO, frequency, amplitude, phase, and orientation. Can we do a little review on the contrast sensitivity function? What do you remember about that? Meg's got something.
Well, it showed us how different species and different ages differ in their sensitivity to frequency.
Okay. All right, very good. So how are we different in our sensitivity to high frequency luminance? Maybe I will call this up. Maybe a picture will say 1,000 words, especially for our visitor, just so she has some clue about what's going on here. So we'll go to this one. And when we mentioned FAPO a moment ago, here it is FAPO, and we have frequency, amplitude, phase, and orientation. We can look at simple images like this. Okay? And you can see that this has relatively fat bars. This has much narrower, the bars are much narrower here. We can fit this black-white pattern, two of them into this unit of space. Here's a black-white, here's a black-white, so there's two of them there. Here, we go black-white, 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 so there's four. So this is now twice, this is happening twice as frequently as this one is. And so across this unit of space, their frequency is different. And as Meg is correctly pointing out, it turns out that we can measure how sensitive you are to light at different kinds of frequencies. We can put up patterns like this and see who can see them, who can't see them, how that changes across our lifespan and so forth. And we come to diagrams like this of the contrast sensitivity function. And we might have really, really narrow bars up here, really, really fat bars over here. And we're sensitive to something kind of in the middle, right? So this is our greater sensitivity to these intermediate spatial frequencies than we have to really high or really low spatial frequencies. And that changes in different kinds of lighting conditions. So we're under pretty bright light now. We would call that photopic. But if it were dusk in here, we'd lose some of these higher, more fine details, as Meg correctly mentioned a moment ago. We're going to lose some of those on the scotopic side. That's when we're only having our rods for our vision and relatively low light levels. These are the comparable contrast sensitivity functions for different kinds of species. Okay, and then it changes across the lifespan. We tend to lose the higher frequencies as we're getting into our later years and so forth. Okay? All right, one other idea that we had, and here we'll start some new information, but also to touch on an old idea. Can somebody remind us what we meant when we said Metamours? This is probably a word that also wouldn't mean anything to our guest. So Metamour, Claire's got something. Yeah.
Metamour is when there's two physical stimuli that you perceive them as the same.
Okay, right, so there are physically different stimuli that we perceive as the same, right? And so what's interesting is there's a sense in which this color yellow is actually physically different from your yellow, even if they look very much the same. So we could take a light meter and figure out exactly what's coming off of your jacket, and we could take a light meter and figure out what's coming off of this yellow, and we'd find that they're actually quite different from each other, but they are psychologically the same. And so that's a curiosity to us, because we're trying to figure out how does a physical stimulus drive our sensory or psychological experiences. Okay? So we come to the idea of Metamours, and now we'll get into something that I think I hadn't done with this group before, so something new for even our students. So here's our definition. Metamours are physically different stimuli that are perceptually indistinguishable. They look the same. Okay? It's a failure of discrimination. And so we're going to now work with the contrast sensitivity function, and we're going to see today if we can do a little demo on a new type of metamour. Okay? And we'll work our way through this and eventually up to phase perception by thinking about the contrast sensitivity function. Okay? So because the contrast sensitivity function differs from that of cats, the human and cat have different contrast sensitivity functions. Okay, we can go back to here. I think we've got a cat on this one. They tend to see lower spatial frequencies maybe better than we do. Okay, so these really fat bars that might become hard for us to see at very, very low contrast levels, they would be able to pick up. Has anybody had that experience in your house, or maybe you've been to somebody's house where they've got a cat, and all of a sudden the cat starts responding to something, like they start chasing something, and we don't know what it is, right? But it certainly is a tremendous curiosity to the cats. That could be driven auditorily. They have a much higher frequency range than we've got. It could be that they're seeing certain low spatial frequencies that you and I can't pick up, and that's what's driving their behavior. Okay. So what we're going to do is see what kinds of things you and I might be able to distinguish that maybe a cat couldn't distinguish because of its contrast sensitivity function. Okay? So in the following example, I'm going to show you photos that look different to you but would appear indistinguishable to a cat. And I wonder if Clara could turn those lights down, because this is going to be really subtle, and we'll see if the folks in the back can make this out. Okay? So you haven't seen this one before, something new. Okay, so two kitty cats are on the screen here. They're actually... It's one picture that has been filtered on one side. So I'll let you take a look at this, okay? And I will admit that we have a copy error here. So there's a little black mark there that doesn't appear over there. But separate and apart from that, that was simply a photographic error. It's supposed to be two pictures of the same cat. One of them has been filtered. I'll let you tell me how you think those two differ from each other. Okay, thanks, Lisa.
The one on the right is blurrier.
Okay, the one on the right is blurrier. Okay, that's a very, very good psychological description, right? And when we talk about what is blurry, we basically said that we've lost high spatial frequencies. In other words, over here, who's got a pretty good view of this cat's whiskers? Right? And kind of over here, are they kind of visible to you here? And then if you come over here, maybe you get them. Probably over here, you don't get them at all. Right? So these really, really narrow bands of light, whisker width, okay, high spatial frequency are lost. So we basically put this image through what we might call a low-pass spatial frequency filter. It allows all the low-pass information and all the high-pass information. Over here, we're going to block out the high frequency information. Okay, so that here we don't have really, really high spatial frequencies that you're sensitive to, but this particular image has them. This one doesn't, and you can see those differences. Probably your cat couldn't. Okay? Because to your cat, this is going to look a lot like that, and the reason for that, if I can dial back, is that your cat can see really low spatial frequencies well, but look at these higher spatial frequencies. The human is relatively sensitive at this higher end, and the cat is relatively insensitive at that end. Who's following that? Is that working for us? Okay. So you and I are looking at this picture of the cat with its whiskers, and your cat is looking at it with us. But because your cat can't pick up these high spatial frequencies, this will look like that to the cat. Okay? But you and I know that something is up. Alexa nailed it. There's something blurry about the thing on the right. Okay? Okay, so that's one idea about how the contrast sensitivities would differ for these two species. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to change the spatial frequency content of the picture I just showed you. Okay, we're going to change the spatial frequency content. We're going to increase the spatial frequency of both stimuli to the difference between what falls inside and outside of our window of visibility. Okay, so let's bring that picture on back. This is what you saw a moment ago. And an interesting feature about spatial frequency is it increases with viewing distance. Okay, spatial frequency increases with viewing distance. So if I had you all get up, and don't, but if I had you get up and walk back and back and back, this picture wouldn't change, but on your retina, the content would have higher and higher and higher spatial frequency. Okay? So what I can do instead of having you get out of your seats, is I can just now make this smaller. Okay? Now, here, I've done the equivalent of maybe move you back, say, 20 or 30 feet. Right? So the image that's landing on your retina now would be, or right now would be what it would be if I projected this one and you were 30 feet back. Who's following that? Is that working for us? Okay. So what I'm essentially doing is moving this to higher spatial frequencies. How many people still have a pretty good view of those whiskers? Are they still visible? Okay. And they're still kind of visible there. All right. But so now we can distinguish these, and they are physically different, so they are not yet metameric. Right. These are not yet metameric. They are physically different and they are perceptually different. Okay. How about now? Can you tell that they are different? Or is it harder to tell? Yeah. Okay. How about now? Okay. So same thing. All I'm doing is shrinking it down. Maybe you can still see those. How about now? Okay. So now you're kind of like the cat. We know that these are physically different, but they've become perceptually indistinguishable because we moved it so far out into your high spatial frequencies that you can't detect that really, really fine difference that you used to be able to detect. Okay? So that thin whisker now is even thinner than it used to be. It's at a higher spatial frequency outside of your window of visibility. Who's following that line of does that make sense? Okay? So pretty cool. Then we could take it one step further. This would be like if you're all the way at the end of the hallway and you were looking at this, this would be the image landing on your retina. So there is a cat in there, and there are whiskers in there, okay? But you probably couldn't pick it up. Interestingly, a hawk might be able to pick that up, okay? And have no trouble distinguishing, yeah, that's the cat with the thick whiskers, and that's that cat that has the blurry whiskers. Okay, so there are ways of detecting that, but our human visual system can't get there. Okay, so now there are many more than 2 cats per unit space. We started out with 1 cat here, 1 big cat here, so we had 2 cats over this big space. If I took this, I could copy it many, many times into the same region of space that I had a moment ago. So instead of having just 1 cycle of the 2 cats, I could now have many, many cycles. So I have many more cats per unit space. Okay? So you can think of cats per unit space or cycles per degree. Either way, it's CPD. I've changed this to a higher spatial frequency. Okay? Low spatial frequency, high spatial frequency. Who's okay with all of that? That work for us? Okay. Now there have been some visual artists who have taken advantage of this contrast sensitivity, and they've done some really cool artistic things with this. Let's see if we can get to that demo. I think you might enjoy this. Again, here's the contrast sensitivity, right? The contrast sensitivity function. We can see what's in here. The cats that I showed you first were about here. As I made them smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, I moved them outside of your window of visibility, or at least I moved their whiskers outside of your window of visibility. Okay. Let's see if we can take advantage of this and put it into the context of art. Has anybody heard of the artist called Chuck Close? Okay. What can you tell me about Chuck Close if you know anything that you can declare about it? Yeah.
I think he's the guy that works with like little bitty pieces.
Okay.
And then like makes them really detailed, and then from far away they make up another big image.
All right, really good. Yeah, so he has this, it's almost a little bit like structuralism. He takes these small components that seemingly are unrelated in and of themselves, but then all of a sudden, at the right viewing distance, they make sense. At a different viewing distance, they don't. Whether he knows it or not, he's taking advantage of our contrast sensitivity function. Okay, so what do you see there? How many people are getting an eye? Does that work for you? Okay. This is actually the cover of a different sensation and perception textbook. Okay. Relatively high spatial frequency because it's small, just like those very, very thin whiskers are high spatial frequency. Okay. So let me see if I can bring it up. So let's imagine that Chuck Close has this on this blue wall of his art exhibit in New York City, and you're entering our museum, if you will, all the way in the back of that hallway. Okay. You're all the way back there. Okay. Then I can bring it one step closer. Still getting an eye? Is that working for you? Still getting an eye? Yeah. Maybe you're still getting an eye, maybe you're not. Okay. You can see all kinds of things happening here now. Any one of this actually is an eyeball. I don't know if you can see that. Right? And then here's a brain. Here's a small child. Okay, so all kinds of things are going on. But way back here, all it was an eye, when all you had was very high spatial frequency information. Now, it might be that the eye itself is not all that salient to you. The other images are becoming more salient to you because they're landing maybe in the sweet spot of your contrast sensitivity function. Okay? So he takes advantage of the contrast sensitivity function in his in all of his art. Okay, so that sets the stage for form perception, and what's cool about that is people have a debate about whether faces are a special case of form perception. Okay, so this is what we were doing for today, something that's new. Let me pause there and see if anybody has questions or comments about Fourier analysis, breaking things down into frequency, amplitude, phase, and orientation, okay, versus the contrast sensitivity function, right, which is taking advantage of the spatial frequencies on the x-axis. Okay. Is that all good? Okay. Okay, so this is probably something that's familiar to you from the videos that we have. By the way, this classroom is what we might call a flipped classroom because the students actually watch a video of a lecture on this topic and they answer some questions before they come in. So they've seen this, the idea that we're able to recognize faces despite the fact that we can be at very different viewing distances or under very different kinds of illuminations and so forth. Mood information is conveyed very, very well. Okay. Okay, so if you know who this is, raise your hand. Please don't call it out, but if you know who that is, raise your hand and keep your hand up, and we'll see how long it takes us for everybody to get this. Okay, some people know who this is, some people don't. Please, no names, just hands up if you've got it. Let me take a quick check. How many people are not sure they know who this is? Okay, that's good. Okay, hands down. We'll give you another moment or so. This is really a fun demo, I think. It's one really cool one on face perception. It actually relates to FAPO, right? Frequency, amplitude, phase, and orientation, because what we're saying here is that this is what we might call a photographic negative, right? Obviously, things are backwards here. Typically, people have white teeth. These teeth here are black. You can see that the whites and dark parts of the eyes are reversed here, and so forth. Okay? So, one more show of hands. Anybody? Okay, I want to ask you who yet? Just one. How many people think they've got it? Yeah? Madison, what do you think? What? Okay. So, what was the P in FAPO? Phase matters. Can we all say phase matters? Phase matters. So what happens, let me go out of this just for a moment and go back to the other one from the other day. Let's go back to our phase manipulation. Okay. So FAPO has frequency, amplitude, phase, and orientation. Here we have the same one that we started out with a little while ago. This is basically the same thing, except we have a phase manipulation. We happen to have a 180 degrees phase manipulation, which is basically what goes on in any photographic negative. What used to be light is dark. What was dark is now light. Who's following that? Is that working? Okay. So all we really did was shift the phase of the first image versus the second image. Let me call up our friend again. Okay? Okay, and we might call this polarity or the direction of the luminance contrast. And it's really, really hard for us to identify this. So what's cool about this is you would recognize this face. And just to make sure we all yell at it, that is Tiger Woods. Okay, you would recognize Tiger Woods under a broad variety of illuminations. If I turn the lights on, you would still recognize him. If I turn them off, you would recognize him. If you move back, if you move up, Okay, so it's not scale dependent, right? It's actually, we might say scale invariant, how big it is. That doesn't throw you off. It doesn't really depend on how much total light is hitting it. But if we manipulate the phase and we go like this, most people in the room did not get that. Now, also Meg and Alex had their hands up. Did you get that?
No.
Okay. Was that a surprise to you? Okay. Right. Really, really cool. Okay, so it turns out that phase matters. By the way, maybe our students can help us out. We learned about a particular type of cortical cell that is phase sensitive. What was that thing called? Does anybody remember? A simple cell is phase sensitive, right? That is to say, there's a cell in our visual cortex that will begin to fire action potentials. It becomes a very active cell when there's a particular arrangement between, say, dark and light. So maybe it's light, dark, light, and that cell will fire crazy to that. If you now fire like crazy to that, if you now change that that phase by 180 degrees, that cell will shut up and not fire anymore. Okay. Okay. I think we have a couple more of these that you might enjoy. Now let's see if we can go on to this. Raise your hand if you know who this one is. This one's a little bit different than just a photographic negative, but it's kind of like a photographic negative. And don't call it out. If you think you've got this one, maybe we'll let Jess call it out. Is it me? Let's see. What's going on here? Oh, there you go. Okay. So it actually is me. Right? So you've seen me fairly recently, right? And yet you probably haven't seen me like this. And you've seen me under a broad variety of lighting conditions, right? And so you can imagine that your perception actually is impaired when we play with phase. Phase matters. Okay. So good call. She was the first person. Maybe everybody else did. Everybody else recognize that as me, and you were just too polite to say so. So that shows you just how salient that is. So the fact that, and we'll go back to Tiger, I think, because they're only two pictures away, right? These are basically, if we think about this white, and how did we create white inside of PowerPoint's wheel? Can somebody tell? We have 3 guns coming out of that. How did that little ditty go? We want to create a white up here. Go ahead, Sibel. Yeah, they'll intersect. Great, real good. She gave us the CIE coordinates. Perfect. 0.3, 0.3, right, or 0.33, I guess, in each of those cases. Do you remember, Sibel, what it would be inside of PowerPoint if I had my gun? Do you remember the range that gun was? So if I had my 3 colors inside of PowerPoint, red, green, and blue, and I get some numbers that I can use there to crank up my red gun or my green gun. What were those numbers? I can go from 0 up to 255. Right, 0 to 255, so you have 256 unique colors. So here, my red gun is 255, my blue is 255, my red, blue, and green are all at 255. Okay? Who's following that? So basically, all we do here is we just flip top to bottom the luminance distribution. So what used to be up at 255 is now all the way down at 0. Right? If you were at 126, I'll call that the middle of this, then you would stay at 126 because that's the halfway point. If you were a little bit above the mean a moment ago, now you're a little bit below the mean. Like maybe some of these, maybe that cheek color is a little bit above the mean here, and maybe it's a little bit below the mean here. Right? Okay? So we're just flipping that luminance table. And that alone is enough to completely throw us off. Okay? All right, see if we get any other goodies. So here's me. Okay? That is going to be a low pass, lots of low spatial frequencies in here. Alexa pointed out that the whiskers were blurry. Who's getting blurriness there? Is that working for you? Okay. Okay, a couple of other ways of turning that around and taking color off and so forth. Okay. Okay. Now we'll see how we're doing on another aspect of FAPO. The O in FAPO stands for? Okay, so let's see if we can try an orientation manipulation here. Let's see if things do depend on orientation. So here we go, and we'll see if we can identify the expression on this. Maybe you've already seen this one. This is a fairly famous one, right? Okay. And this appears to be a woman. When I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of time on swings, and I would sort of dangle backwards over the swing as I was going. It just looked like a fun way to see the world. It looks like she's on a swing hanging backwards, and she looks like she was as happy as I was when I was a child. If we now rotate her face, not through 180 degrees of phase, but through 180 degrees of orientation, we have the same picture shown here, okay? So what's cool about that is somehow you probably didn't pull that expression out of this, but you have no trouble pulling that expression out of here. So it's kind of a distorted bit, okay? So we learned in the Tiger Woods demonstration that phase, the P in FAPO, matters a lot for our face recognition ability, a special case of form perception, right? Okay. We learned a lot about that. Now we're seeing that orientation matters a whole lot. Okay. I find that a little bit disturbing, right? Because somehow, I don't have trouble recognizing triangles. You can take a triangle and spin it like this, and to me it's still a triangle, right? But that is a very unusual expression that I just can't pick up here at all, right? And we all know Tiger Woods. By the way, I used to do this with, I don't have one yet of Dr. Adam Weinberg, but the president before him was Dr. Dale Noble. So I would also have, photographs of Dr. Noble either upside down or phase reversed in photographic. And people have no clue who this guy is, right? So they're really fun demos to do. Okay, so orientation matters. All right, other things that we do as we're using our Fourier analysis to pull out facial information and say that's Tiger Woods, that's me, that's Dr. Noble, that's a woman who has a mixed up emotion on her face. We'll look at other kinds of emotions that psychologists have studied universally. They go to different cultures and they'll say, well, different cultures have different customs, they have different vocabularies, but there might be some universality to facial expressions. And at least at the time of this writing, the thinking was that there are 6 emotions that we recognize universally. I do this demo every semester. Actually, it kind of bombs, but I like that it bombs. We'll see how it goes. Okay? So these 6 emotions are the ones that I've drawn on the board. I'm going to turn the lights up just for a moment, because in a moment, I'm going to show you pictures, facial pictures of an actor who's trying to give us one of these emotions. Okay? So it's sadness, surprise, anger, disgust, happiness, and fear. We have a much broader range of possible emotions than that, but these are what the psychologists are telling us are probably universally expressed on faces. Right? That anywhere you go, even if you've not known these folks before, if you were angry, they would know it. Okay? If you were surprised, they would know it. If you were jealous, they might not know it. That doesn't appear to be universally expressed on faces, but the claim is it's these. So if I turn this down, can you still see those or not really? Yeah? Good. Okay. Let's see if we can go to our actor. And this is the same person who's going to try to exhibit these for us. And you have now something like a 6 alternative choice, multiple response that you can make. Let's see what this person is doing. Okay? Because can you identify which emotion this is? Yell out one of the 6, and just yell it out as soon as you see it. Okay? They claim this one is fear. Okay? Right, so I'm not sure how universal these are. Okay, right? Okay, is that what you said? Did you say fear? Okay, okay. So there's your set again: sadness, surprise, anger, fear, happiness, disgust. Okay. Let's see if we can go to another one. Here we go. Same guy, different emotion. One more time. What do you think? One of my students a few years ago said, "This actor sucks." I don't know. I think he's doing better than I could do. Here's another one, okay? Okay, so now we're starting to trim down on the list, right? So it's not really a fair game anymore. But same guy. Here we go. He looks sad and disgusted. Okay, sad. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, I think that one, interestingly, maybe he's got that one down, or maybe it's that anger really is that salient to the rest of us. Okay. Okay. So, by the way, among people who study vision science, the people who study face perception actually don't have a lot of cachet. And I think it's because there seems to be a lot of ambiguity in these stimuli. Like, come on, that can't really be sadness, right? But anyway, that's how this person tried to model those 6 different emotions. Right? But what's interesting is the same guy, right? We have the same luminance levels and so forth, but there are going to be small perturbations in how his lips are parsed or not, and maybe how his eyes are more open or less open. And so somehow all of that is making its way through your Fourier mechanisms to provide you information about that person's emotional state. So on a more macro level, we can use our Fourier analyses to tell us about who is who. Which one is Tiger Woods? Which one is me? Which one is former President Noble? Here we can now, within a phase, try to extract some information about the emotional state of that person. And so this FAPO is doing a lot for us, doing all kinds of really interesting things. Okay, then there are this whole issue about prosopagnosia, right? A particular kind of disorder that we have when somebody can tell you that a face is a face, but they can't tell you that that's Jess's face or that's Sarah's face, or they can't put those together, even if it's a loved one that they've known for many, many years. Does anybody want to remind us? It was a TED Ed question that we had about the distinction between a declarative response and an autonomic response. So Melanie's got something.
So for a declarative response, if they were asked, like, do you recognize this person, they'd be like, no, I don't know who that is, but they still have like a galvanized skin response, or like they'll sweat, like they'll have like sort of the autonomic nervous system reaction to it,
yeah.
But they won't be able to say that they recognize it.
Yeah, right. Very nicely explained. And it is curious to me that somehow our nervous system is responding to all kinds of stimuli, some of which we are unable to report an awareness of. Right? It's almost as if of all the possible activity that goes on in your spinal cord, your peripheral nervous system, many parts of your brain, only a small fraction will actually bubble up into something that you can report about, something that you can declare. Make a declarative statement, a declaration about what is in your memory, or a declaration about what you're experiencing. We did a lot of this in Intro to Psych, right? There's this whole declarative memory kind of things, the items that you can report or declare versus the things that you can do. You might be able to perform a task that you can't speak about, right? Interestingly enough. Okay, so very interesting idea of prosopagnosia is how that is described. And you might see in here agnosia as one of the root words. And for those of you who are into neuroscience or biology, you probably get to be pretty good at pulling out Latin or Greek root words. Can anybody think of a variation on that word outside of the context of prosopagnosia where you see agnosia? Yeah.
People like agnostic?
People are agnostic, and that means that they are... They don't know, they're without knowledge, right? They're without knowledge about, and typically it's on the issue of one's belief in a higher power. They might say that they're agnostic, but what they're really saying is we don't have knowledge about that, right? They're taking a I don't know approach. So here's the idea of we don't know who that face is, right? Okay, is what's going on there. Inferotemporal, right? So infero means lower or ventral in the brain. Temporal lobes are over here, right? So that portion of the brain, or on either side, it might be the case that we have inferotemporal damage, and you can tell that a face is a face, but you don't know whose face it is. A couple of weeks ago, we had a round-the-table discussion during one of our student-generated discussions. I think I shared with this group at the time, but you can tell me if I've got my groups mixed up, that we used to have a administrative assistant who had a mom who was suffering with Alzheimer's disease, and the mom could no longer visually recognize her daughter, but could recognize the daughter auditorily. So if the mom and our worker and her mom had a telephone conversation, she would immediately know who is talking, which of the daughters it was, but she couldn't do it by face as a type of prosopagnosia. Okay? All right. And then we get into other issues that are going to now pertain to the greebles. Okay? And what's cool about the greebles is that they really force the issue of whether face recognition is a special case of object recognition or whether faces really aren't all that special. And some of the distinguishing factors here would be whether or not we have this subordinate classification. Can we see subcategories as quickly as we can see categories? Okay? So some people who are car experts will see that a car is coming toward them, but they won't just say it's a car. They can say that's a Toyota Prius or that's a Honda Civic, and they have really good information about a broad variety of cars. As soon as they can tell it's a car, they can tell you which car it is. When I look across this room, as soon as I see each of your faces, I know pretty well which particular face that is. So not only do I know it's a face and not an iPad, I know it's a particular kind of face. I get that immediately. I get the subordinate classification. As soon as I get the overall group, some people who are really good at bird watching, right? Some really highly trained birders can tell you, there it goes, and it wasn't just a bird, but it was also a particular kind of a robin, or it was a sparrow, and they can give you that subordinate level classification. Okay, so that's a level of expertise that we seem to have with faces that we might not have with other kinds of stimuli. So people have asked whether faces are special or not. Okay. And so to develop this idea, some researchers have brought about the greebles. Before I put it up, can somebody begin to tell us about the greebles? Okay, thanks.
So the researcher who's Tar.
Mike Tar, yeah.
He developed this system of greebles, which are sort of fictional characters that don't have actually faces that we'd be familiar with, and then he made two sexes based on the orientation of the protrusions, I guess.
Yeah, right, okay.
And just through all of this, he demonstrated that after practice, people could distinguish between these greebles in the same way that they can distinguish between the whole faces.
Okay, right. So with enough practice, and it might be several thousands of trials, right? It might be the case that we get to be greeble experts, even though greebles are completely artificial constructions. Right? We turn out to be greeble experts, and so from that behavioral observation, we might say, well, maybe faces aren't that special. Right? Maybe it's just a matter of we have a lot of practice with faces, so it turns out that we're really good at them. But it's just a practice effect. It might not be that we've inherited from our evolutionary history an automatic benefit toward faces. Maybe we have, maybe we haven't, but the greebles, we haven't seen greebles in our evolutionary history. In fact, some people in this room probably haven't seen the greebles, and here they are. So these are the different characters that you're asked to name or to discriminate. And people are, after a certain amount of practice, they can say, well, I'm in the Samar family, or I'm in the Osmond family. But to be able to pick out a particular one and give it a name correctly, right, is a level of expertise that we have no trouble with in faces, and after several thousand trials, Zach Speckley mentioned, we can do that. There was something else that happened. Do you remember what happened physiologically? Or maybe you're not recalling.
Was it they show that there was the same way to
Yeah, so, right, okay. So typically, if I have you in an MRI device and I'm showing you faces to look at, your inferotemporal lobe will light up. It will become very active. Okay? So the inference that we draw, correctly or incorrectly, is we believe the inferotemporal lobe is playing an important role in face perception. And the reason for that is when I turn it on, you get activity there. When I turn it off, the activity goes away. If that area is damaged, we get prosopagnosia. Okay? Now, all of a sudden, that becomes very active for greebles, but only for greeble experts. Okay? Right? Only for greeble experts. So it might be that the inferotemporal lobe manages visual expertise for us, and faces per se are not that important. Who's following the argument? Okay? Somebody who's in the 130 class did a literature search and came across a Mike Tar abstract. I don't know which of you that was, but I was excited to see it, partly because I was a student of Mike Tar's a few years back when I was at Brown. He was then at Brown, now he's at Carnegie Mellon University. Okay, so more greebles. Okay, I think we've made the point about greebles. Okay, let's see if we can move to something that's even higher level in vision than faces. So faces are these very, very complicated items that we can kind of recognize under appropriate conditions, but if you change the phase, we can't. If you change the orientation, we can't. This is a higher level process than the other features we were talking about earlier, like color and size and so forth. Okay? So now we can go to still a higher level process, the process of visual imagery. Okay? So why don't we take just a little bit of a visual imagery tour. I'll ask you to think about how many people did have breakfast this morning. Okay? All right, can you think about where you had breakfast? I'll let you close your eyes, if you will. Close your eyes and think about where you had breakfast. And maybe you can see yourself looking at, in your mind's eye, looking at the food that you are eating. Okay? So that food is not physically in front of you now, so there's no light coming onto your retina that's being transduced by a cis-trans isomerization. That's something that means something to people in our class. So there's nothing there, but how many people can, for example, see the color of your food this morning? You can see, okay? So anybody want to describe it for me? Anybody kind enough to report what they had for breakfast? Okay, thanks, Claire. 2 pieces of brown toast, okay? All right, so that's, so we get the idea about you seeing that. Now, clearly that's not in front of you right now. She could have just made that up, right? I mean, maybe, I don't think she did. She could have made that up. So the issue becomes, well, if you want to track visual imagery, how do you go about doing that, right? What are some of the tests that you can do? And Steve Coughlin is a professor at Harvard University who tried to take this very subjective type B experiment and turn it into a type A experiment, using some very clever work in visual psychophysics to investigate this idea of visual imagery. Okay? So we do have these salient psychological experiences. Sometimes images come back to you from, visual memories essentially come back to you from years ago. Right? You probably can remember, who can remember their kindergarten classroom, at least approximately? Yeah. Okay. It's kind of fun, and you can kind of close your eyes and see it. You know, I can see mine. Mrs. Dilks was my kindergarten teacher, and she's now actually a friend of my mom. So occasionally I have Thanksgiving dinner with my kindergarten professor, which is a big kick for both of us. But I can see her back when she was just a couple years older than you. She was like a 23-year-old first or second year teacher when I had her. I can picture that really very, very saliently. Clearly she's not in front of me now. This is visual imagery. So what's driving that? What part of our visual system is making this possible? Okay, so why don't we see if we can get a feel for how Steve Koslin does this. So this was the part that I deliberately left out of the video. We have time for another demo or two here. So this is us going to try. We're going to try visual imagery here, but we're going to turn it into a type A experiment. So here I have what I will call 4 quadrants. 1, 2, 3, and 4. I've got them numbered in the way that English readers would read, from top to bottom, left to right. I realize that many of you have training in trigonometry, and this would have been quadrant 1. Anybody have that before? Like that's okay. So we're not going to go with trigonometric quadrants. We'll go with how you would label these from left to right, top to bottom, if we were reading this. Okay. I'm going to ask you to take a look at this. They always contain simple lines, right? Nothing particularly interesting there. Then what we're going to do is, after you've taken a look at this, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, and I'm going to ask you to make some judgment about what is in your visual imagery, and we'll see how you do. Okay? Okay, so let's see how this works. I'll let you take that in just for a moment. You don't have to stare at it. This won't be an after effect kind of a thing. Take that in. I'm going to ask you to make a response, and I'll ask you to put up either 1, 2, 3, or 4 fingers. Okay? So you can open your eyes still for the moment. And only one of those will be correct based on the question that I give you. Either quadrant 1, quadrant 2, 3, or 4 will be the correct answer to the question that I give you. Okay? So, one last look. Yeah? Okay? Eyes closed, everybody? Okay? I'm looking and I see that all students have their eyes closed. So let me float this question by you. In your mind's eye, in your visual imagery, please compare quadrant 2 and 3. And which of those has more bars? Don't yell it out. Put up either 2 fingers or 3 fingers. Okay? So which has more bars? 2 or 3? And now can you hold your hands up really, really high? Okay? All right. So put your hands up really, really high. And can you keep them up? And can you open your eyes while your hands are still up? If you look around the room, almost everybody is voting for a 2. The question was, which one has more bars? Let's go back to the answer. Okay? And we were comparing 2 and 3, and 2 does have more bars. Okay? So the idea is that actually is a correct answer, right? But you presumably got that only by using your visual imagery. Why don't we do 1 or 2 more of these, if we could? Okay? So we'll let you stay at this one, right? Okay, the same image as before. I'm going to ask you a different question or two. We'll let you take that all in. Okay? Taking it all in. Okay, if you would all close your eyes, please, I'll give you another question. Okay? Okay, now I want you, in your visual imagery, to compare quadrant 1 to quadrant 4, and the question is this. Which one has longer bars? 1 or 4? Put up either a 1 finger or 4 fingers. Which one has longer bars? Okay? Either 1 or 4. And if you put your hands up really, really high, okay? Eyes are closed for the moment. Keep your hands up, please. Keep voting the way that you're voting. Would you now please open your eyes and look around the room? And what kind of consensus do you see around the room? Okay? And so that's pretty cool, right? It could have been 50-50, right? But it wasn't 50-50. The question was which one has longer bars, okay? And there's 1 and there's 4, right? So clearly you're answering here based on something like a visual memory, visual imagery. I think I've got 1 more. Okay, we'll let you look at that one more time. Let me see if I've got 1 more. Okay. All right, why don't you go ahead and close your eyes? I'm sorry, I didn't have 1 more. Sorry. Okay, I thought I had 1 more set of questions. You can open your eyes again. Sorry about that. Let me begin to wrap that up just by saying that type A is what we're doing here, right? So now we can, Claire could have been putting me on a moment ago. She could have made up the brown toast thing, right? But we actually have a verifiable answer in this. Quadrant 1 contains more or less bars than quadrant 4. It contains longer bars, or contains bars that are lower spatial frequency, higher spatial frequency, right? So we can do this all day, and we can ask what kinds of things light up in an MRI, okay? And when that happens, we know that we have some correspondence between what is going on in stimulus-driven vision and what is going on in visual imagery. Okay? Anybody want to call out a brain area that's implicated in both of those visual processes. Stimulus-driven vision, which is what we were talking about for the first 3 weeks, and now visual imagery. What area V1 appears to be very, very active. They don't talk about it here, but a nice variation on this is we can ask you to pretend that you're hearing a loved one's voice. Maybe it's a family member, something like this. All of a sudden, V1 is not active. Right? I mean, but your primary auditory cortex gets active. So now there's no acoustic energy, but we're using very similar neural machinery for imagery as we would for raw stimulus-driven sensation, this bottom-up sensation. Who's following that? Okay. Anybody want to help us out with a final point about TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation? There's one more point about that, and I'll turn the lights up. Steve Kosslin did all this, and then he went on to do one more with transcranial magnetic stimulation. Meg's got it.
So, like, regular fMRIs allow us to kind of just, like, passively, like, look at the neural activity.
Okay.
But TMS actually lets us influence and, like, change the results within, like, change that neural activity during visual imagery stimulation.
Sure.
So we can, like, skew the results and see, like, what the reactions are.
Right. So, two important ideas in science are that we collect our data through observation and through experiment. And in many ways, you can run experiments with fMRI, but you're basically observing the neural activity. Zach pointed out a moment ago that with the greebles and enough practice, all of a sudden IT becomes active, but you need a certain amount of practice before you get there. But what's cool about TMS is you can, at least for a couple of 100 milliseconds, change the state of the brain, right, by applying a magnetic pulse. And because there's a relationship between a magnetic field and the surrounding electrical field, and because your brains are essentially electrical fields, when you put on a magnetic pulse, you can change the surrounding electrical field through a physics principle called Faraday's rule, or Faraday's law. Okay? So we can actually now disrupt your visual imagery by applying a TMS pulse to your area V1, as Melanie mentioned, and that's also going to throw off your performance. But if you apply it now to Broca's area or some other region, you don't throw off the performance. So that's a pretty good indication that that's the thing that's doing the work for you on visual imagery. Who follows that line of reasoning? I think Steve Kosslin gave us a very nice series of studies on that. Okay, we're at 1:19, so we are finished with that. Thank you all for your participation in these demos. We had a lot of demos today. I look forward to Wednesday's class when we're going to be in a U, and we'll have a conversation about partial blindness. No need to bring a printed paper. We'll do that all through the submission on Blackboard. Okay? Thanks for a great conversation. See some of you in about 10 minutes. I'll see the rest of you on Wednesday. Thank you, Jasbeth, for joining us. Such a pleasure to have you.
Typical list.